Hey, I got a question for you. Are you an active B2B consultant? Are you an experienced professional who is looking to start into the consulting industry? Or are you a student wondering whether or not starting a career in consulting is worth it? If yes to any of those questions, you are a great fit to have a 15 minutes free coaching call with me. And during that call, we will be looking at your career and life goals, as well as your current and past experiences. And we will also be able to figure out whether or not we can together build a roadmap towards building your desired career with your desired lifestyle. So don't hesitate to get in touch with me at consultinglifestyle.fm slash coaching. COACHING. Consultinglifestyle.fm slash coaching. Now, let's go and listen to the episode. Hello, and welcome to the Consulting Lifestyle podcast to Davis Nguyen. Davis, how are you?
It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you. You're also a fellow consultant, and you have helped a lot of people launch a consulting career. So I believe that it would be a great episode for the listeners. But first, can you share a little bit about your career story?
So to share my career story, I am probably the most unlikely management consultant you'll meet, at least my path there. So before I was born, my family came from Vietnam, so they were political refugees. And so when you think about what it means to be a refugee, so think about like the Ukrainian refugees, for example, right now. It's not like you get to choose where you go. It's more like what country picks you in and what town will be able to take you in as well. And so my family ended up escaping by boat to from Vietnam to the US. And when they arrived, they were taken in by a town on the south side of Atlanta. And that's pretty much how we got to start. And the community we grew up in were full of other immigrants and other refugees. So a lot of people didn't have high school diplomas, didn't or first generation. So for example, my grandparents and my mom, they never finished high school. And so when I was born, it was kind of like, well, we're in this new country. We'll all figure it out together. And so there was no talk of management, consulting, business, or anything at the dinner tables. It was more like, well, how do we just have enough money on the table? And to give you that perspective, the high school I went to, the celebration point was just being able to graduate from high school because a lot of the parents didn't graduate from high school themselves. And so that was
Yeah.
already a landmark versus other communities where graduating from high school is just a stepping stone towards college. But first going to college is like, wow, that is an amazing accomplishment. You're gonna have block parties put together for you. And just to put that more into more perspective, I remember when I went to college, so I ended up getting a scholarship to Yale and ended up studying there. And so imagine this poor kid coming from this neighborhood where most people don't finish high school to go into a place like Yale. And during freshman orientation, we were having one of our freshman dinner, and one of the other students asked, well, what do you guys want to do after college? So basically, what do you want to do for career wise? And I remember people just going around the table and they were just listing out careers. For example, you have your lawyers. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I know a divorce lawyer back in my community. Yeah, he was one of the more successful people in my community. And then next person would go and she would say, oh, I want to be a banker. And I thought to myself, wait, I have friends who didn't finish high school. They're like literally working at Bank of America right now. They're making minimum wage, I think. Wait, why are you going to Yale just to be a bank teller? That makes
Mhm,
no sense. And of course, I have no clue what investment banking is or anything like that.
mhm.
And so that's to show you management consulting didn't come into my radar until right before my final year of university. And at the time, during my summer internships, I didn't think about traditional paths. Like I didn't know about the Goldman Sachs, I didn't know about the Deloittes and so forth. It was more like, well, what do I feel like doing this summer? And I would just reach out to companies that I read on the news or saw on YouTube or whatnot. And I would just reach out and just work there. And two of the companies that I worked with were founded by two amazing entrepreneurs. And at the end of each of my summers, my junior and my sophomore summer, each of them basically just said, "Hey, Davis, it seems like you want to be an entrepreneur," and they're right. I definitely wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I said, "Well, the path to entrepreneur is many paths. You can start there after university, but we actually recommend, or from their perspective, they recommended you should start in consulting." So one of them was actually a Deloitte partner or former Deloitte partner before he started his own company, and the other one had worked with McKinsey teams at his prior company. So he was pretty high up at a bank. So he's a banker and he was pretty high up. And he hired plenty of McKinsey teams over the year. And he was like, I see how they work, Davis. I think you would benefit from working in consulting. So when I get back to campus to start this recruiting for management consulting, which is in itself a rigorous process that people start at years, if years in advance, maybe some a few months in advance. But I'm coming back in campus, and I tell one of my best friends, it's like, "Hey, I did you work in consulting for the summer? I want to get a job full time." And she's like, "Great, Davis. So do you have a resume? Do you have a cover letter? And case interviews are in 2 weeks." And I was like, "No, I don't have a resume. I don't have a cover letter. And what is a case interview?" And so I basically had 2 weeks to figure everything out.
Wow. Wow. And you managed to land the job.
Ended up getting multiple offers and ended up
That's,
choosing Bain and Company to be the firm that I work at.
yeah, that's excellent. And for how many years did you work as a management consultant before going on your own?
Sure. So I was going on my third year at the time, and I was given a choice. So I loved what I was doing in consulting. I I was lucky. I got to work in a city I really loved, San Francisco. Got to work on projects, teams. Not all projects, as you know from your days at Deloitte, not all projects are going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. But more or
Hmm.
less, I was very excited about the people, the work, and the culture at the office. But what ended up happening was that as I was entering the third year, I had an offer from an education technology company that was that basically just needed a former consultant to go in and join them. It was in education, so which I love. So I had a choice between taking it full time or continuing at Bain. And I decided, well, I can always go back to Bain, but
Hmm.
this chance to be at this education company where it's at in the stage, let's just do it. And so I took the leap of faith and left consulting and took a 40% pay cut to join the work of education.
Excellent. And you're still in the world of education in a way with what you're doing with my consulting offer. So, how has it started? How did you start your current business?
So my consulting offer actually started because I joined the work in education. So for anyone who's not aware, education does not pay anywhere near what it should for the impact that people are having, like teachers and so forth. It's just not. And myself coming up from a community where education was the route out of poverty as well as like a milestone. I knew the value of education. That's why I joined in the first place. So it wasn't for me about the money, even though I had a family support, my grandparents, my mother at the time. But I wanted to be able to impact more lives, and so I took the job in education. But at that time, three things: one, it's in education, so taking a pay cut. Two, it was a new organization relatively, so definitely not getting paid the same amount as I would at Bain. And third, I was still living in California, and so it's kind of like California state taxes, California cost of living on this education compensation, and so everything was fine until one day I get a call from a family member, and basically they said, "Hey, we family member needs $20,000 for basically medical expenses, and anything in my family basically we covered the minimum health insurance, nothing over. So they need $20,000, and I didn't have $20,000."
Hmm.
And so what I needed to do was figure out, well, how do I make $20,000? I couldn't just go to my employer and go to my manager and just ask for a raise. Well, that wasn't an option. So I needed to figure out another way. So I was already working in education Monday through Friday, and it was, but what else could I do? And so I thought, what if I just made some income on Saturdays and Sundays? So I was figuring out, well, what can I do? Do I fly to Vegas and gamble? Do I drive Uber? Or there's probably another opportunity there. And prior, when I was at Bain, I was working on the recruiting team and I loved it. And so I was pretty active on forums online, answering questions. And a couple people realized that, oh, Davis, you left consulting. You can technically coach me now, right? Would you, if I paid you, would you look at my resume, my cover letter, and do some mock case interviews with me? And I said, sure. And that's basically
Hmm.
the premise of how it started, was just having this medical bill to get paid off. Eventually, the medical bill would get paid off, and I thought, all right, let's go back to education full time. But the referrals just started coming in, and I just really enjoyed that process of helping students and recent grads get into jobs like McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture, BCG, and so forth. And it just brought a happiness to my face. And the more referrals came in, and eventually just I was like, well, what if I do this full time, build a team around it, and actually build a process, a system, and just a whole company around this. And that's pretty much the origin story of it, which was I needed to make $20,000 for a medical bill, and people found
Yeah.
value in
Yeah.
getting help.
No, that is great. I mean, like necessity is the mother of invention, and it's great that you looked at your own skills and what people were spontaneously asking to you, and you created a business around it. So when you decided to actually create a business around it, what were your kind of first step? Did you start to write processes, create a website, hire an assistant? I mean, how it went.
I'll tell you this: we didn't have a website for about 2 years. Like we were literally operating off of a PowerPoint slide that described everything. So in the beginning, when I tell other founders about starting a business, the first thing I said, the first thing is it's not science. You need clients. It's that short for right. It's kind of like the joke I always say is that no company ever goes bankrupt by not having a fancy computer, by not having the best accountant in the world, or not having the best website in the world. But companies do go bankrupt when they don't have customers, they don't have clients, they don't have income coming in. And
Yeah,
so in the beginning, it was just like validating that market. And so for me, it was like, how do we build out a process that's actually proven? Like, can we actually get students offers in management consulting? Can we get recent grads offers? So it was like figuring out, well, how do I help them? Two things: one, land the interview, and second, pass the interview. So it was that simple in the beginning. It was just to prove out that I can actually do this. It wasn't luck that I was able to pay off the $20,000 from the dozen of students we worked with, but I can actually do this in a sustainable manner.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very good. And the type of the type of students that you help are students that are in the last year of their higher education. Is it that type of student?
So we help two types of populations. The first are students. So when I say students, I don't just mean like undergrads, but I think MBAs, masters, PhDs, and so forth. So these types of degrees, and we tend to help them throughout the whole spectrum. So if you're a first year undergrad, it might be a little too early, but if you're in your two final years of your studies, that's where we help, because that's where internship opportunities open up, and that is where full-time offers hang up. So that's the first population. But we also help people who have graduated. So think of these are industry hires, experience hires, for example. For example, let's say that you're a couple of years out of university, you're working in, let's say, oil gas, and you're an engineer, and you want to make that transition into a more strategic role. That is an example where we work. Or, for example, you're working at Deloitte and you want to give it a shot at a firm like McKinsey. That's the
Mhm.
population work. So it's either you're in school or you're out of school and want to transition into a strategy consulting role at a big company like a McKinsey, a Bain, or even a smaller boutique firm as well.
That's great. And about how many people have you helped so far?
So by the time this comes out, we've crossed about 700 people we've helped get jobs in management consulting.
Wow, this is absolutely amazing. 700. Knowing that your company, at least full time, is what? It's about 5 years old or something like that.
Yeah, we're crossing that right now.
Yeah, yeah. So if we count the number of days, if we do like a ratio, the number of people that you have helped versus the number of days, this is a huge ratio that you have helped a huge amount of people that you have helped. So that's amazing. That's really amazing. Another thing is, yeah, people that want to, as you said, like people that are maybe working for Deloitte, they want to go to McKinsey, they want to go in more strategic consulting. How do you see it? Now you're not necessarily there full time, but how it was working as a strategy management consultant right now, and how do you see the evolution of the profession? How do you see it in the future?
Sure. So you have like two questions here. It's like one about the evolution of the hiring process and the evolution of the work itself. So I'll answer both of those. So the evolution of the work itself. So even though I haven't been in consulting for a number of years now, or at least management consulting at a big firm, is the two things that really helps us is one, we're hiring people who recently have left the firm, so we're always updating that information. But also second, we have good relationships with the firms that we work with. So getting intel and information is part of our process, and that's how we stay up to date. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to hit that 700 number I mentioned earlier. So that's how the
Mhm.
recruiting process will work and stay updated. On the work side of it, So a lot has changed in the last couple of years, as you know, from your own experience, as well as the global pandemic that we all went through. And the evolution of it is it's going to continue to change, especially with economic conditions here. It's going to be there's three things that are going to happen. One is that the need for management consultants and the projects we work on will shift. So during the growth years, obviously companies will want to spend and grow, but other years it's like, well, how can we continue to build a moat? How can we be more efficient with what we have? So the title of the shift will work. Will shift there. But second is that all of a sudden, when other sectors, let's say, for example, tech, aren't hiring as much in terms of their traditional fields, then a lot of the candidates who would normally work at a Meta or a Google would then want to apply to consulting. So it's like it becomes a little bit more competitive. But the work itself will also be evolving because there's so much focus on efficiency during these times. So if you look at the recessions that have happened previously or over those time periods, it's like where the management consulting field changes the most. So not just in process and people in technology, but it's like those evolution in terms of leaps and bounds. It's kind of like if you asked somebody at the end of the previous recession and someone who was at the start of it, you can kind of tell like those shifting the model really worked. And it's like these leaps and bounds that happen because by nature, by the economic forces, you're forced to be able to adapt or you're out of business. And so that's where a lot of the leaps happen. And it's an exciting time for to be in the consulting field because of it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And yes, we have had a few years of disruption with the pandemic, and actually, strategy and management consulting companies were called upon to help government on that, or to help public organizations on that. And no one has ever lived an actual pandemic, but still you had to call upon your management consulting skills to contribute on that. So that's a great that's a great perspective. And how do you see? Maybe I'm going back more onto your background. Coming from Asia as an immigrant in that small town in the south of Atlanta, where the holy grail was to have an education and just have a job. Uh, do you think that it has changed now, 20 years later?
Absolutely. I would say a larger part of it is just a mindset. So, for example, when you're around people who believe that a certain thing is the limit, and then of course you tend to believe it. And it's like the idea that, for example, if you're playing any sport and there's a certain level of play that you're so used to, when you're on another level, when you're playing with people who are better than you, you're all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I didn't even know you could do that. And that's the shift. Is when I was in my community, it's kind of like the goal was, well, let's graduate from high school, get a good job or in the community or in Atlanta proper and so forth, and go to college if you can. So that was different versus I remember one of the moments that really changed my life was back in Georgia. There's a summer program called the Governor's Honors Program, and what it is it takes at the time about 700 students, and it's completely free. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to attend. From 700 up and coming students from the state of Georgia in their two final years of high school or upcoming two final years, and it brings them to the summer camp. And just to put things into perspective, I'll use one of the standard tests, which is the SAT. And so the SAT at the time was scored out of 2,400, and 2,400, the national average at the time, and still is 1,500. My high
Mhm.
school was doing about 1,100. So we were basically 400 points below the national average, right? And so every time someone at my high school would score above let's say a 1,600, people were like, whoa, how did you do that? And that was like a marker of success because that's what we were surrounded by. And all of a
Mm.
sudden, I go to the summer camp, and all of a sudden there are just people scoring 2,200, 2,300, perfect 2,400. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, I'm applying to these schools. These are my safety schools. I'm like, those are your safety schools? Whoa, people would just do anything to get into those schools. And it just really shifted my mind about what is possible. And so what I try to do now is when I go back to my community is two things. Is like one, when I'm speaking in front of students, I want to tell them what is possible. Like even if today you feel like the clothes you have on you are the best clothes you'll ever have, you can work higher than that one. If you think that you want to buy a home for your mother so that you're not renting, then you can do that. It's like telling what is possible versus what you see in front of you. And the second is I donate a lot to scholarship funds in my neighborhood just because there were teachers who believed in me, and I want to be able to believe in the students that come out of it. And so that's the shift that I want to be able to make, not just for my community, but for others as well, because you don't know what you don't know. And it's
Yeah.
hard to be able to. And sometimes I think one of the biggest things that can change a person's life is not that you tell them to do something, but that you tell them something is possible. Because if no one tells you it's possible, then either you don't believe it's possible, or you're like, oh well, it's within shot. Let's just go for it. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of people are in the former group where they don't believe that it's possible.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, information is information is key, and trying to not have limiting belief is very important. And on that topic, what I can see for people that are watching the video is that you have a few books behind you that are maybe related to that. So, is there any piece of knowledge beyond the people that you know, etc., that you found in those books that you could apply for your business, my consulting offer? And
Absolutely. Like books are, I love books. As in, ever since I was little, that was essentially what made me believe was as a kid, as a little elementary school, I would just go in my library and just start reading books. I particularly enjoyed two genres of books. One were autobiographies, and the other were later on I would discover has a term called self-help books, which I love because I was reading all these books, like for example, Seven Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and The Secrets to Success, and Think and Grow Rich, and all of these. I'm like, wow, these are amazing, and that really did change me. But to your question about books that actually helped my business, yes, there are business books that have helped, but I found that some of the best books weren't business books. So my favorite book is Man's Search for Meaning, which is about the writer is a Holocaust survivor, and he talks about his time, and he's a psychologist. He talks about his time during the Holocaust and what he observed about people who would make it day to day and people who just struggled in these camps. And
mhm,
when he's observing it, he said that, well, you can't choose the circumstances you're in, but you can choose how you react to it. And as business owners, you know yourself, there are days when you feel like you're a genius. Like tomorrow, Forbes going to knock on your doors and say, hey, we want to interview you. And other days, you feel like the sheriff's going to come in and just like kick you out of your house and evict you. And it's like you have the highs and lows of an entrepreneur. But I always think back to that book, and I think back to my own family's journey of surviving the Vietnam War, coming over to the US, and what that was like. And it doesn't make it as hard as in all things are relative. Like even when I was Bain, I would still continue to read Man's Search for Meaning and other books because I always thought even my toughest days, like getting up at 5 a.m. to go to the client site and not leaving until 2, 3 a.m. So basically I had like 2, 3 hours of sleep. Those weren't bad. As in 99.9% of the world would trade where they are right now to be where I am.
exactly.
And it just gives me perspective, like beyond any tactic, beyond any other business book. It's just that mindset that it gets tough and you can choose to quit or you can choose to get tougher. And that there's like 99.9% of the world that just wishes they could trade places with you, and just being grateful for that. And so that books like genres of those really impact me a lot more. So obviously I have business books in the back too, but I would say things around mindset and things about gratitude have helped the business a lot more than any one tactical business book.
Mhm. Mhm. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Very good information. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about with regards to your business or what you do that you would like to share to the audience?
Sure. So I would say two things. So based on the other episodes I've watched, and it's like the audience. There are two types of audience potentially listening to this. One are people who are wanting to go into consulting, and then people who are in consulting that might want to go for another firm, or even like yourself, start their own consulting firm. So my advice on these or for each populations, one is that if you feel like consulting is for you, make that decision because it is a worthwhile path. There are trade-offs, right? It's not one of those career paths as a spotless. There's a lot of pros and cons, and obviously on my website I talk a lot about that as well. On is consulting for you? But once you make that decision, is if this is what you want, go all in on it. It's or as someone told me, it's like there's no way to be half pregnant. Either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant. It's like one of those. And so the same decision for those who are thinking about consulting for them. And for those who are thinking about making that entrepreneurial leap or going to another consulting firm is I think about I would talk to people who've done it and talk about the pros and cons of it. Because sometimes you think that the grass is greener. As in having been a business owner now is that there's a lot that I didn't know when I first started. It's almost like when you start something, I always think like you're always overly enthusiastic about it, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, and then you're like, oh, there's a lot more I don't know. So definitely, it's like it's a worthwhile, yes. But a lot of my friends who are still in consulting ask me, hey Davis, should I start my own company? Should I start my own consulting agency? And I think Well, let's talk about what the realities of owning a business is like, because it's not like the grass is always greener. There are a lot of things that you don't know until you start. But let's talk about those things.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And now it's the end of February in Canada, and it start to be the tax season. And I can tell you, these are not sexy things to do, but you have to do them as a as a business owner. I believe it was really great to have you on the show. So that value proposition from my consulting offer is really good, because if you really want to have an interview with one of those, have the interview and also pass the interview with one of those big management consulting firm, that's definitely a worthwhile offer to look at. Now, I believe it will be an easy question for you, but when I say a consulting lifestyle, what does that mean to you, Davis?
When I think about life consulting lifestyle, I think of two things. I think of one, growth, and the second thing is I think about impact. And why I think about those things is that when you choose to be a consultant, you're basically choosing to be a learner for life, because consultants who don't learn get phased out pretty quickly, as you know from your own profession. Like, you're always having to
Mhm.
evolve. So it's like when you're choosing to be a consultant, your lifestyle is basically about growth and learning. It's like, yes, it's business learning, but it's also personal development as well. Because how do you go from an individual consultant to managing a team to eventually managing multiple projects to managing a client? There's a lot of those, right? So you're choosing a life of growth. And the second thing that you're choosing is a life of results and impact, because again, consultants are paid for the impact that we make. And if you don't make impact in your clients' lives or in your team's lives, you're going to be quickly out of a profession.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. Great response. And for anyone who wants to find you, so where do they have to go?
So I'm very reachable on LinkedIn. So I'll send on the show notes there. LinkedIn. You can also email me, Davis at myconsultingoffer.org, or you can check out our website. It's just myconsultingoffer.org, and all our information's there. So I am very easy to get a touch of.
Okay, excellent, excellent, Davis, and looking forward to hear about even more people that you have helped with your services in the future. So thank you for coming on, Davis.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Consulting Lifestyle Podcast. If you have enjoyed the episode, leave a review on iTunes or one of your preferred podcasting platform. And if you want to further our relationship, please join our community. Our community is available at consultinglifestyle.fm/community. Looking forward to keep in touch with you.